It's only been a little bit more than 24 hours, and Liberal Party leadership candidate Mark Carney is in more trouble once again. This time, the National Post has exposed him for basically saying one thing in English and then saying the opposite thing in French. This is a trick you pull in like the 80s, in the 90s, back when nobody's gonna really check. You'd have to be tape recording both French media and English media and having someone who speaks both languages to confirm that they are different statements. He's doing this in the year 2025, so I guess he's a bit of a mad lad for thinking he can get away with this, but it didn't work out. I'm going to be linking this article in the description below as well as pinned at the top of the comments. It's quite incredible. I don't need to read it for you guys in detail. You can go read it yourself. I don't want to, steal the words of the National Post. But generally, what has happened here is that Mark Carney, on two major subjects when it comes to public finance as well as energy, is literally saying the opposite thing in the two different official languages in Canada. So in Kelowna, he'll show up and say that he's in favor of building pipelines. He wants to get them expedited so that we can be more energy independent and we can ship our oil and gas products not just to the US, but to Asia and to Europe. But then he'll go to Quebec, and if a Quebec interviewer asks him, are you going to force a pipeline on Quebec, even if voters don't want it, which is silly because actually voters in Quebec do in fact want a pipeline. Liberal leftists in Quebec don't want it. But then when asked that, Mark Carney will say, I'd never force a pipeline onto Quebec. Same thing on transfer payments. Mark Carney will be asked, well, Mark, are you going to restructure transfer payments to be between provinces? Because it's been something that's caused a lot of social friction in Canada, and it's a major line item in Canada's budget every year is the transfers between provinces. And he says, yes, in English, we need to restructure it, save some money, be able to maybe reduce taxes in the long run. But in Quebec, when he is speaking French, and I guess technically also Northern New Brunswick, he then says, oh, no, of course I wouldn't do that. We're not going to restructure transfer payments. The Quebecers rely on it, and we can't take Quebecers for granted and all this stuff. Mark, this is making you look horrible. And I'm all here for it. I'm a conservative. I want him to lose. But my goodness, if the Liberals think that this guy is their star candidate, they have another thing coming to them. I want to show you again the federal polling numbers right now, because I think as much as people are fearing that Mark Carney is going to be able to catch the Conservatives and that the Conservatives peak too early, I don't think so. In fact, I think right now Mark Carney is peaking too early because of the current response bias driven by the leadership going on for the Liberals. When you have a party leadership, you're going to have a lot more supporters activated to answer polls. And that's where you get poll models based on new polls like the one based off the Angus Reid poll that Sharia Teest here has done that shows the Liberals actually winning 166 seats and the Conservatives only winning 141 seats. But as my friend Chris from the Great Canadian Bagel podcast has pointed out, I'm going to go find this post. The actual numbers here don't really make sense. So Chris here says, it's laughable to me to see polls with the Liberal Party of Canada at 60% in Atlantic Canada. That's simply not possible. The Liberals under Carney are not going to beat 2015 numbers here. Remember, 2015 was an anomalous year because Harper actively screwed up here. Poilievre has done the opposite. And he's right. The Liberals back in 2015, I think, got high 40s, if not a little bit more than 50% of the vote in Atlantic Canada. And that's why they swept the province, literally winning every single seat in Atlantic Canada. So Mark Carney is going to somehow do several points better than Justin Trudeau did in 2015 with the terrible government record he has to run on, which is his own record. He is not a fresh face. The man advised on economic policy to the Trudeau Liberals for the last 4 to 6 years. Honestly, at the English language debate, either Ruby Dalla or Chrystia Freeland herself needs to turn to Carney and says, you are the one giving the government bad advice for 4 or 5 years. You and Trudeau forced me, Chrystia Freeland, or if it's Ruby, you forced Chrystia Freeland to pass these bad policies, to implement them. She tried her best. It inevitably failed because it was bad policies. And then you threw Chrystia Freeland under the bus. And by all means, I am not trying to make excuses for Chrystia Freeland. She is also a terrible liberal politician. If she had principle, she would have left a long time ago. She has somewhat some principles, but it's mostly only when it benefits her. Still, the net effect is that Mark Carney has been giving bad advice for several years, and once he becomes leader, he's not going to suddenly be viewed as a fresh face. He can he can market himself that way now, but the conservatives have literally file folders full of information on everything he's said and done over the past 4 or 5 years that Canadians absolutely hate. And once Canadians know it was him that did it, they're going to hate him as a candidate just like they hated Ignatieff. Look at this. This is the Angus Reid poll. This is also what proves to me that this is not a very good poll. Look, Alberta, the Conservative Party of Canada gets 57% there. The Liberals get 27, New Democrats 14, and others and independents 3%. That doesn't make any sense to me. Really? You're going to have 27% liberals in Alberta and 14% NDP. That's not a real poll in my opinion. There's no chance that the Liberal Party of Canada is going to get 27 in Alberta. They would be lucky to get 15. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if the Liberals and NDP combined are less than 30%, not up to 41% here. That's ridiculous to me. Saskatchewan, that's a little bit more realistic, but that's the problem with polls with bad sample sizes, because this poll needs only 921 people across all provinces, and that means in like places like Alberta, it's only 104 people they're polling, and Atlantic Canada only 84 across several provinces. Look at this. The Liberal Party is getting a higher percentage in rural Canada than they are getting in urban Canada. This tells me this is a massive outlier poll. In fact, look at the difference between urban and rural Canada. There were 772 people polled in urban Canada and only 149 people polled in rural. This shows me, again, I don't blame the pollsters. Many of these are actually very good pollsters, but I don't think they are properly adapting to the fact that because of the Liberal leadership race and because Justin Trudeau is gone, there's a lot of Liberals who are suddenly artificially excited about the next election. Have the Liberals gained support since Trudeau left? Undoubtedly, they have. They were never going to sit at 20% forever, especially considering Jagmeet Singh is such an incompetent leader of the NDP. In 2011, the Liberals could fall below 20%, but that's because they were up against Jack Layton on the left. With Jagmeet Singh, it's really hard to push the Liberals below 20. And now they have bounced back to probably about 26 to 29%. Abacus Data, I think, has been doing a really good job of trying to demographically balance their polls so they don't just have a bunch of people in a Starbucks lineup in downtown Toronto answering their polls. And so they're actually giving out realistic numbers. These other pollsters, I don't think, are correcting for that. So when you see that the poll is one extremely urban and metropolitan, that's a problem. And the fact that their rural numbers are only polling 149 people and the Liberals are doing like 39% there proves to me that people are not double checking this stuff. Their polls are too metropolitan, too disproportionately probably university college educated, not enough tradespeople, farmers, plumbers, and whatnot. And then they also have way too many people who are basically hardcore liberal supporters. You're not usually going to get too many hyper partisans in your poll. And I think that the polls, in a certain sense, because it gets them attention, are just not correcting for it. Because it's shocking when you drop a poll and saying, look at Carney skyrocketing. In fact, let's go and quickly look at the chart that Angus Reid has put out. I know I showed this before, but I'm just going to say, this is not a realistic chart for any election. Unless Polyev had like shanked somebody and that Jagmeet Singh told people to vote liberal, you're never going to have a party hit 16% in December and then be at 37%, literally 21 points higher in just a couple of months. I'm sorry, it's a response bias. Liberals went from being only 60% likely to take a poll if they were called to being like 95% likely. So they've had a small bump, but then that bump in the polls is being exacerbated by the fact that they are also basically answering polls far more than a typical conservative is. This is what happened to the PPC in 2021. PPC voters were like 110% likely to take a poll. They would they would take multiple phones out just in case somebody called them to do a poll. And so that's why in certain polls they were doing like 12% and 10%, but only came in at like 5.2. And it's just because they were literally going to take every poll that they were asked to take, whereas a conservative or a liberal and NDP in that election were like half the time, if you give them a call, they might take the poll. Anyways, so I just want to also mention, because this has now been confirmed to be true, although I'm just showing the article from back when it was a rumor. Again, like I said in yesterday's video, if the liberals were truly surging, why am I watching liberal ministers suddenly say they're not running for re-election again? Pascal Saint-Onge is a one-term liberal MP, and as you can see, she's not exactly 75 years old. She is in her like late 30s, early 40s. Why is Pascal Saint-Onge leaving if it's such a slam dunk of an election? Even if she didn't want to be minister or whatever, she has some, personal reasons to not like want to run it for re-election. Why not stick around to just be a lazy backbencher? A lot of these people could easily stick around. They're going to have to work some job. They can't just go home and work no job. Like, I guess you can, but like, why not stick around? Why not stick around for your pension at least? Just to be selfish about it. They're just leaving. And it's probably because the internal liberal numbers, because parties don't skew their own internal polls. Because what's the point of lying to yourself? You actually want to know where you have deficits of support and where you have surpluses of support. Places that you don't need to campaign too much in because you're already winning, and areas on the margins that you definitely need more resources deployed into. Somebody leaving in Montreal tells me that it's going to be a knife fight in Montreal. And even if she wins, she doesn't really want to stick around in opposition. They're not winning. And a lot of I think the upcoming debates for the Liberal leadership race are going to prove that none of these people are star candidates. None of them are making Canadians excited, and they are bad communicators. Again, Carney keeps proving this over and over again. He is terrible at communicating. He cannot go 5 seconds without stumbling all over himself. Here, here's Chrystia Freeland trying to label the conservatives the maple syrup, whatever conservatives, as if this is a line that's ever going to take off outside of like sycophantic leftists on Twitter.
People are recognizing that this is such a crucial moment for Canada, and they are recognizing that our party is the party to fight for Canada. They're also recognizing, by the way, Pierre Poilievre is not the guy who can do it. He is maple syrup MAGA. All he wants to do is imitate Trump, and I don't think Canadians trust him to stand up to Trump.
What does she even mean by like they're imitating Trump? What? Cutting wasteful spending? Cutting taxes? Investing more in the military? Like, the thing is, if she actually said the comparisons, it wouldn't hold up at all. That's why whenever the Liberals attack Poilievre as being like Trump, they'll never name policies that are similar because those policies would actually probably be quite popular. They always just play Poilievre drinking a glass of water and then Trump drinking a glass of water because that's as close as you can actually get negative comparisons. They sometimes both use the same words, and even those are like things people agree with, like being tough on crime, like wanting to end bail reform that the Liberals have been pursuing and the Democrats were pursuing in the United States. It's all so absurd and so stupid. But to circle back, again, this has not been a very long Liberal leadership so far. Mark Carney has probably had about 7 to 8 separate scandals so far, and there's more waiting to break. I have heard that his company, Brookfield and whatever, has major overlap with the Chinese government. They meet with the Chinese government and suddenly they get better deals from the Chinese government. And that this guy with Brookfield and Associates, he's going to become the Prime Minister of Canada after having very deep ties with the Chinese government with his investments. Also, the guy keeps shooting himself in the foot. If he was planning on running for prime minister, he didn't plan very well because last year his company moved their headquarters from Toronto to New York City. And I don't mind that he did that. Probably a smart move. He and Trudeau's ruined the economy here so bad. He probably should move his business in terms of pure selfish reasons to actually want to make money. You should probably move to the US. I'm going to stick to Canada, but I'd like to fix this country. But my goodness, you think if you were trying to run for prime minister, you wouldn't step in every bear trap that Michael Ignatieff stepped in. I also just want to quickly address the idea, well, then why did Stephen Harper bring him into his government if he was so good? And people do this as the counter to my nickname for Mark Carney, Mark's Carney. It's because, oh, well, if he's such a Marxist, if he's such a socialist, why would Harper want him? Mark Carney is a smart guy. He can be competent at a job if Stephen Harper and Flaherty tell him exactly what to do. Carney will carry it out fine. That's okay. Carney, in a decision-making position, is terrible. This is what the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom was warning Canadians about, Liz Truss, by saying that he was extremely high-handed around Brexit. And instead of being what a normal governor of the Bank of England should do, as being a follower of government policy, if the government wants to do something on the financial side, he should follow suit with the appropriate monetary changes and policies that are needed to make sure that the government policy works out. Instead, what Liz Truss said is that what Mark Carney would do is come to them and say, you're going to do this and that, or I'm going to walk out and blame you guys for everything and say you're messing up Brexit and you're destroying the economy. The man is extremely high-handed and willing to threaten people to get what he wants. So him doing a good job under Harper really just reflected that Harper was a good manager of people, a good leader overall, and when Carney followed orders, he could do fine stuff. But when Carney is doing what he wants and advising Trudeau with what he genuinely personally thinks, it all falls apart and fails because he doesn't actually know what he's doing. His perspective is toxic. And I think a lot of people are going to figure that out quite quickly. Anyways, so that's it for me today, guys. I just want to give you a reminder. If you like the show, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Really helps me in the algorithm, guys. See y'all later. I'll be making another video today. Oh my goodness, I'm going to try and cover the Ontario election debate, which was torture to watch.